He had already sat down on the cold tile of the emergency clinic, his back against the steel table leg, and laid his hand flat over the chest of a dying German shepherd, and he stayed exactly there. The poison was already deep in her blood. Her breathing had gone shallow and wrong, and her gums had paled to the color of wet paper. And the vet had done everything the textbook allowed, and then everything it didn't. "You should go home and get some rest," she said gently, the way they teach you to say it. "There's nothing more you can do for her tonight." The SEAL looked up at her with eyes that had watched men die on 3 continents, and he answered very quietly, "Then I'll do nothing right here." He did not move from that floor for the next 9 hours. He talked to the dog when the machines went quiet, and he was silent when she rested. And he counted her breaths the way he had once counted them under fire. And somewhere across the valley, in a warm house on a hill, the man who had put the poison out on the trail was pouring himself a second drink and telling himself the problem was finally handled. Before we go on, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with it until the very end. We read every single one, and what you're about to witness will remind you that there is a kind of loyalty that does not negotiate with a clock and does not leave, no matter what the night has decided. Nathan Cole was 43 years old and built like something that had been tested past the point most things break and had simply declined to. He stood 6 feet even, lean and dense through the shoulders, with forearms ridged from rope and rock, and a way of holding still that filled a room more than movement would have. His hair was sandy and going gray and cut close, and a weather-burned face carried a scar through one eyebrow, and the kind of deep lines that come from squinting into hard light in hard places for 20 years. His hands were scarred across the knuckles and unhurried in everything they did. His eyes were a pale, sea-washed gray that seemed to take the measurement of a room without permission. Exits, hands, the distance to the door. Out of a reflex, 2 decades of service had welded so deep he no longer felt it happening. They were not cold eyes. They were watchful. And underneath the watchfulness was something steadier and sadder. The look of a man who had seen what people are capable of at their worst and had decided, against the evidence, to keep believing in them anyway. He was not unfriendly. He had simply learned to spend his words carefully, the way a man spends water in country where there isn't much. And he moved through the world with a banked, contained force, the unmistakable quiet of a man who had long ago stopped needing anyone to know what he could do. He had served 21 years in the United States Navy and retired as Senior Chief Petty Officer out of the SEAL teams. He'd done more deployments than he kept count of, Iraq in the bad years, Afghanistan across the worst of it, and a string of places he had signed papers agreeing not to name. He left the Navy with a back held together with hardware, a hearing loss in his right ear, and a quiet he had never figured out how to fill. Shadow had been part of how he filled it. For the 4 years since he'd settled in the high country outside Carson Falls, Colorado, doing search and rescue volunteer work with the county and keeping mostly to himself. The dog had been the thing that got him up in the dark mornings and the reason he came back down off the mountain at night. He had buried a lot of people. He had decided, somewhere in the last 4 years, that he was not going to bury her too. Not without a fight. Shadow was a 9-year-old German shepherd, sable and dark, 68 pounds of muscle and scar and patience. Her coat ran almost black along the spine and warmed to deep amber down her legs and chest. And there was a long, pale seam of scar tissue across her left flank, where shrapnel had opened her on a rooftop in Ramadi, the same night it had nearly taken Cole. And a clipped notch in her right ear that had healed into something that looked like a mark of rank. She had been his combat dual-purpose dog, detection and patrol. And she had alerted on a wire that should have ended him and dragged a wounded teammate by his drag handle out of a kill zone under fire. And Cole had spent 8 months and a small fortune in legal fees, adopting her out of the program when their war was over. She moved, even at 9, with an economy that took years to build, never wasting motion, never reacting to noise, only ever to meaning. She was not a pet. She was the one living thing on earth that had stood beside Nathan Cole at the worst of it and never once flinched. And now she was dying on a clinic floor because she had eaten something off a walking trail at sunrise. Carson Falls sat in a high cold valley under the snow line of the Sawatch Range, a single main street, a feed store, a diner, and a scatter of ranches and trailheads where the aspens had already gone bare. It was the second week of November, and the first real snow had come the week before and crusted hard. And at night, the cold came down off the peaks with a clean mineral edge that got into your chest. The emergency clinic was a low building at the edge of town, fluorescent lights spilling yellow onto the frozen gravel lot. The kind of building where the heater ticked and the coffee was bad, and the only sound after midnight was a machine breathing for something that couldn't. Outside, the valley was black and silent and enormous. Inside, on the tile, one man kept a vigil the way other men keep a faith. The man on the hill was named Clifton Granger, and he owned a great deal of that valley. He was 54, silver-haired and handsome in an expensive way, the largest private landholder in the county and the man whose name was on the wing of the hospital, the new ball field, and a real estate development called High Aspen Reserve that he was carving out of 2,000 acres along the trail system above town. Granger did not like dogs on the easement that crossed the edge of his land, and he did not like the people who walked them. And over the past several months, he had taken to solving the problem the way he solved most problems. Quietly, decisively, and with the confidence of a man who had never in his life been made to answer for anything. The county commissioners took his calls. The sheriff golfed with him. When an elderly woman's dog had died on that same stretch of trail 6 weeks earlier, and she had come in shaking with grief to report it, she had been told, kindly, that dogs eat all sorts of things, and sent home. People need to control their animals, Granger liked to say, swirling his drink. It's my land. I'll manage it however I see fit. He believed he was untouchable, and for a very long time, in that valley, he had been exactly right. The dog dying on the clinic floor was the truest victim. But she was not the only one. There was also Edith Vance, 78 years old, a retired school teacher who had walked that trail every morning for 30 years with a small brown dog named Biscuit, and who 6 weeks ago had carried Biscuit's body home in a beach towel and buried him under the lilac, and had not walked the trail since. She had reported it. She had been dismissed. She was the kind of woman who wore her grief with her chin up and apologized for taking anyone's time. And when she heard the next morning that the Navy man's shepherd had been poisoned on the same trail, she put on her good coat and drove to the clinic in the cold because she had decided that she was done being told she had imagined it. She had tried to handle it alone once already. She was not going to make that mistake twice. It had happened just after first light. Cole walked shadow on the trail above town every morning. And that morning, she had nosed something in the brush at the edge of Granger's fence line, and Cole had called her off it a half-second too late. By the time they got back to the truck, she was unsteady. By the time he reached the clinic, she was convulsing. Dr. Marin Okafor, the only emergency vet in 40 miles, met them at the door and went to work. And somewhere in the long, terrible middle of that morning, she looked up at Cole over the dog's body and told him, carefully, that this was not something Shadow had simply eaten. The pattern of it, the speed of it, this was bait. Concentrated, deliberate, laid where a dog would find it. "I've seen this exact presentation once before," she said quietly. 6 weeks ago, an old woman's little dog, same trail. Cole did not say anything for a moment. Then he asked her one question, very evenly. Whose land does that trail run along? And Dr. Okafor told him, and watched something settle behind the seal's pale eyes that she would later describe to her husband as the most frightening calm she had ever seen on a human face. He made his first call from the floor without leaving the dog. He called the sheriff's non-emergency line and reported a deliberate poisoning and asked plainly that someone go photograph the bait on the trail before the snow buried it. The deputy who called him back 2 hours later was apologetic and useless. The trail crossed private land, he explained. Mr. Granger had every right to control pests on his own property. There was no way to prove a dog had eaten anything specific. And frankly, Senior Chief, these things were almost impossible to make stick. Cole listened to all of it with his hand on Shadow's ribs, feeling each shallow breath. So, nobody's going to look, he said. There was a pause on the line. It's complicated, the deputy said. Across the clinic, on the table, Shadow's tail moved once at the sound of Cole's voice. Just once. A single weak sweep against the steel, and Cole put his forehead down against her shoulder and stayed like that for a while. Then he straightened up, and his face had changed, and he made the next call. That call was to a former teammate named Diaz, who now worked for a foundation that placed retired working dogs, a man who knew people, and through Diaz, before the night was out, Cole had reached a state agricultural investigator who handled exactly this kind of poison, and who could not be golfed with by Clifton Granger. He had also, around 2 in the morning, remembered something. He kept trail cameras on the ridge above the easement for the search and rescue work, motion-triggered, weatherproof, running for weeks at a time. One of them sat on a tree at the bend in the trail not 40 yards from Granger's fence line. He sent Edith Vance's grandson, who had appeared at the clinic at midnight, and asked how he could help, up the ridge at first light to pull the card. And he stayed on the floor with the dog. He did not leave her. Whatever happened next, he was going to be touching her when it did. The crisis came at 3:50 in the morning. Shadow stopped breathing. Dr. Okafor moved fast, and Cole moved out of her way and then back in, his big scarred hands doing exactly what she told them to. And for 90 seconds, the only sounds in that building were the vet's clipped instructions and a machine's flat tone, and a man saying a dog's name low and steady, over and over, the way you talk someone back across a line they're trying to step over. Shadow. Stay. Stay with me. He had said those words before on a rooftop, with his own blood freezing in the cold and her dragging him toward cover by his collar. Stay with me. The line on the monitor stuttered and held and climbed. The dog took a breath on her own. Dr. Okafor sat back on her heels with her hands shaking and said she had never seen anything like it. That this dog had no medical business being alive. And Cole said nothing because he could not, and put his hand back where it had been, and did not move it again until the sun came up. She lifted her head at 6:48 in the morning. She did it slowly, against everything the night had promised. The way a thing comes back that has decided the coming back is worth the cost. Her ears came up first, then her head off the towel, turning until her amber eyes found the man on the floor beside her. And she looked at him the way she had always looked at him, with a steadiness that needed no translation. And she pressed her muzzle into his hand. The vet, watching from the doorway, said the word miracle without meaning to. Cole didn't call it that. He called it Shadow. But something in him that had been clenched all night finally let go, and he leaned his head against hers. And for the first time since the trail, he let himself breathe all the way down. Then he heard a car pull into the gravel lot outside, and he knew, the way he always knew, exactly who it was. Clifton Granger came into the clinic lobby at 7:30 in a sheepskin coat, with his lawyer 2 steps behind him and an expression of practiced, generous concern. Because word travels fast in a small valley, and a Navy SEAL's poisoned bow was the kind of incident a man like Granger preferred to manage personally and early. He had come to be seen being kind. He had come to offer to cover the vet bill, to call it a tragedy, to make a donation to the animal shelter, to make the whole thing dissolve into his own benevolence the way everything in that valley eventually did. He was mid-sentence. Something warm about how terrible this was. When the dog on the table at the end of the hall lifted her head and looked straight at him, Shadow did not growl. She fixed on Granger with her ears forward and her body gone still, the specific total attention of a dog that has identified a threat and is waiting only for permission. And she held it, and the whole lobby felt it. Granger's easy voice trailed off. Then Cole stood up. "Senior Chief Nathan Cole, United States Navy, retired," he said. And he did not raise his voice, and every person in that lobby heard every word. 21 years, SEAL teams. That dog you're looking at pulled a wounded man out of a kill zone in Ramadi while she was bleeding out herself. He came down the hall slow and easy, no threat in his hands, all of it in his eyes. 6 weeks ago, you killed Edith Vance's dog with the same bait, on the same trail, and they sent her home and told her she imagined it. He stopped a respectful distance away, which was somehow worse than if he hadn't. "There's a trail camera on the bend above your fence line. It's been running for 3 weeks. I've got the card. There's a state poison investigator who's already seen the toxicology, and he doesn't golf with the sheriff." He let that sit. "I'm going to give you exactly 1 chance to do this the right way before he gets here. That's more than you gave either of these dogs." Granger's lawyer started to speak, and Granger talked over him, his voice climbing. "You can't prove a thing. That's my land. Do you have any idea who I am in this county? I'll have your—" He looked around the lobby for the deference that had cushioned his entire life and found, in the faces of Dr. Okafor and Edith Vance, and Edith's grandson, and the 2 ranchers who'd come in with a sick calf, nothing but the cold of people who are seeing a man clearly for the first time. "This is harassment," he said, smaller now. "This is harassment of a private citizen." The state investigator arrived 11 minutes later, with the sheriff's senior deputy beside him, looking like a man who'd been woken up to a problem he could no longer golf his way out of. They had the toxicology. They had the card from the trail camera, which showed, time-stamped and unmistakable, a silver-haired man in a sheepskin coat crouching at the bend in the trail at dusk. Nobody spoke for a long time after that. A woman covered her mouth. Edith Vance, 78 years old, stood very straight and watched Clifton Granger be told to put his hands behind his back in the lobby of an animal clinic. And she did not say a word, because she didn't need to anymore. Cole watched it without satisfaction. He had seen too many men brought low to enjoy the sight of it. He turned away before it was finished and went back down the hall to the dog, who was watching him come and who thumped her tail twice against the table when he reached her. By the following July, the aspens had leafed out gold-green along the trail, and Shadow ran it again every morning, slower than she used to, and gray all through her muzzle now. But alive, nosing the wind, chasing the ground squirrels she had no real intention of catching, dropping into the cold creek to her chest and looking back at Cole with her mouth open in what any honest person would have called a grin. The vet said she'd likely lost a year off the far end of her life to the poison and gained, somehow, the will of 3 dogs. Clifton Granger pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts of aggravated animal cruelty and a raft of environmental charges. lost the High Aspen Reserve development when the financing collapsed under the publicity, and went to state prison for 31 months. His name came off the hospital wing that spring. Edith Vance adopted a one-eyed shelter terrier she named Captain and started walking the trail again, every morning, chin up. Dr. Okafor framed nothing and told the story constantly. Deputy who wouldn't look transferred counties. And Nathan Cole, who had spent 21 years learning how to leave, how to clear a room, how to extract, how to be gone before the cost arrived. Slept all the way through the night that summer for the first time in longer than he could remember, with one hand hanging off the side of the bed, resting in the fur of a dog who had refused to die on him because he had refused to leave. Sometimes love doesn't look like a cure. Sometimes it looks like a man who sits down on a cold floor and simply will not get up, who has nothing left to offer but his presence and offers all of it, through every hour of the longest night, asking for nothing back. The doctors give us the prognosis, and they are usually right. And then once in a great while, something refuses the prognosis, and we reach for the word miracle, because we don't have a better one for what loyalty can do when it decides not to leave. God does not always heal us the way we ask Him to. But sometimes He sends us one faithful soul who stays, who keeps the watch, who counts the breaths, who whispers, "Stay with me," into the dark, long after the reasonable people have gone home to rest. That staying is its own kind of grace, and it can carry the both of you, more often than the night believes, all the way to morning. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are worth staying for, and that the ones who truly love us do not leave when the night turns hard. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And tell us this: have you ever had someone, two-legged or four, who refused to give up on you when everyone else had? Your story may be exactly the light someone else needs tonight. And if you believe in stories of loyalty, courage, and the quiet faith of people who simply will not leave, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, keep watch through your darkest hours, and remind you always, you are never as alone as the night would have you believe.